To the world, Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer seemed like the embodiment of a perfect Hollywood marriage. Every red carpet, every magazine spread, every public appearance painted them as unshakable, timeless, a couple whose love could survive anything. Yet, behind that polished image, a different story lingered, one that few ever glimpsed. Inside their Brentwood home, silence carried a weight heavier than applause or accolades. Nights stretched into long, restless hours, punctuated by whispers and quiet tension, the kind of tension that lingers in a house long after laughter has faded. Their son, Nick, once the light of their lives, began to change in subtle ways that no one could ignore. A distant glance here, a late return there, the faint scent of smoke drifting through the halls, each small sign a warning that the harmony of their household was beginning to fracture. Rob reassured himself that it was normal, that teenagers grow and falter, that love could overcome any storm. Michelle, however, sensed the undercurrent of something more troubling, a shadow beneath the surface of ordinary life. Small requests for money began innocently, casual and infrequent, but quickly escalated, growing more insistent, more demanding. Rob, driven by a deep parental instinct to protect, complied, hoping to shield his son from the consequences of choices he had yet to fully understand. What was intended as protection began to blur the lines between love and enabling, each decision a test of patience, restraint, and endurance. The home, once filled with warmth and laughter, began to feel different. Every room carried an invisible tension, corridors echoing with the quiet weight of anticipation and fear. Arguments were no longer overt confrontations. They became silent negotiations, whispered discussions at midnight, where every word mattered and every gesture was calculated to preserve the fragile peace. Rob reflected on the toll of his public life, the demands of directing, writing, and artistic perfection, which often pulled him away from intimate family moments where intervention might have changed the course of events. Michelle, equally dedicated to her work and activism, carried her own burdens, balancing a rising career with the vigilance required to maintain family stability. Their children's struggles were intertwined with these pressures, each request, each misstep, each disagreement contributing to a slow erosion of trust and certainty. Rob described nights when Nick's anger manifested physically, times when the son he once knew became unrecognizable behind a familiar face. Doors slammed, voices cracked, and the echoes of conflict reminded them that love alone could not solve everything. Michelle urged accountability, while Rob instinctively sought protection, and the tension between these approaches created an ongoing silent battle. One fought not with shouts, but with careful measures and enduring patience. Moments of hope appeared intermittently, fleeting signs of understanding, small gestures of remorse. But setbacks soon followed, deepening exhaustion and anxiety. Rob's inner conflict was constant. The desire to shield his son from harm and public scrutiny clashed with the necessity of guiding him toward responsibility. Each evening was a careful rehearsal of restraint, a navigation of emotional landmines, where every action could ripple outward with consequences. The once sanctuary-like home transformed into a labyrinth of tension, where love and frustration were inseparable and hope was both a lifeline and a source of pain. Rob's recollections of earlier days with Michelle served as a reminder of the contrast between then and now. He remembered meeting her on the set of When Harry Met Sally, a radiant young photographer whose presence altered his perspective, whose influence inspired him to rewrite the film's ending so that hope would triumph over heartbreak. Their marriage began in simplicity and privacy, a small ceremony in Hawaii with only two strangers as witnesses, emblematic of a life they intended to lead, focused, intentional, and shielded from external pressures. The years that followed were filled with achievements, milestones, and family moments, but the gradual accumulation of stress, the subtle changes in Nick's behavior, and the relentless pull of public and private responsibilities began to expose the underlying fragility of even the strongest family bonds. Rob realized, in quiet moments of reflection, that love, no matter how fierce, could not always prevent pain. Silence, chosen out of protection and hope, became a prison, a weight that bore down on him, Michelle, and their children alike. Their private battles, fought in whispers, in unspoken glances, in the measured steps of careful parenting, created a narrative of endurance and heartbreak invisible to the world. And yet, even in the midst of this quiet despair, hope persisted, a fragile thread connecting them, reminding them of the love that had brought them together, that had inspired them to create, to protect, to endure. It was within this tension, within the interplay of fear, devotion, and exhaustion, that the story of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer began to unfold, a story that was never meant for the public eye, yet one whose truths would eventually resonate far beyond the walls of their home. Before the public ever saw them as a perfect couple, Rob Reiner's life was shaped by the duality of fame and personal expectation. Born in Hollywood, the son of a legendary filmmaker, he grew up in a world where applause was abundant, but genuine intimacy was scarce. Success, inherited and pursued, came with its own silent costs, and the lessons of early life instilled in him a sense that achievement must coexist with sacrifice. He learned the rhythm of cameras and scripts, the discipline of perfection, and the way a single misstep could ripple through reputation and legacy. Yet behind every accolade was a quiet void, a longing for something more than public approval, a yearning for connection, for understanding, for a family life that could withstand the pressures of his career. Rob's first marriage ended in heartbreak, leaving a residue of caution and regret that he carried into his future. Work became a refuge, directing films and crafting stories where endings could be controlled, where emotion could be channeled safely onto the screen, yet life off-camera remained unpredictable, uncontrollable, and often lonely. Michelle Singer's story was equally compelling, though grounded in a different kind of resilience. Born into a Jewish family in New York City, her mother a Holocaust survivor, Michelle grew up with an acute awareness of the fragility and endurance of human life. The lessons of survival, strength, and the importance of observation shaped her character from the earliest years. Fluent in French and Spanish, educated at the School of Visual Arts, she immersed herself in photography, developing a keen eye for truth in expression, for capturing what people try to hide behind composed faces. Her early years were marked by laborious effort, carrying equipment, adjusting lights, and learning from others. Yet within those routines, she mastered the art of perception. Her photographs began to tell stories beyond the obvious, each image a study of emotion, vulnerability, and the subtle tensions of human behavior. By the mid-1980s, her work had garnered recognition. Portraits and magazine covers captured both beauty and truth, giving her a voice in a world dominated by others' fame. The intersection of Rob and Michelle's lives occurred unexpectedly, but felt inevitable in retrospect. Rob, newly single, encountered Michelle on the set of When Harry Met Sally, where her presence radiated confidence, intelligence, and quiet strength. It was a moment that illuminated the emptiness he had felt despite his career triumphs. The initial connection was immediate, profound, and life-altering. Barry Sonnenfeld's jest that Rob would marry Michelle, not the actress, yet was destined to meet someone whose presence would redefine him, echoed more than humor. It presaged the deep partnership that would follow. Their marriage was quick in its formation, but deliberate in its intent, a private ceremony in Hawaii symbolizing a life chosen deliberately, shielded from external intrusion. Rob and Michelle's partnership was built not only on love, but on complementary strengths. Rob's warmth, generosity, and exuberance contrasted with Michelle's discipline, structure, and meticulous attention to detail. She became the anchor to his expansive energy, the stabilizing force that allowed their family to function amid the pressures of Hollywood careers and public scrutiny. Their home, initially a sanctuary, was carefully maintained through their combined efforts, a space where creativity, laughter, and love could coexist with order and expectation. Yet, the same differences that brought balance also created friction. Rob's tendency to protect and indulge clashed subtly with Michelle's insistence on boundaries and accountability, a dynamic that would later be magnified by the challenges they faced with their children. Parenthood brought its own lessons and pressures. Jake, born in 1991, was the first, a child entering a household of both acclaim and high expectation. Nick followed in 1993 and Romy in 1997, each adding layers to the family dynamic, each requiring vigilance, patience, and negotiation. Rob and Michelle approached parenting with different priorities. Rob's instinct to shelter and nurture sometimes collided with Michelle's focus on discipline and preparation for the real world. Together, they navigated the challenges of public perception, the allure and intrusion of fame, and the private responsibilities of raising children in a demanding environment. Nights were often long, filled with whispered deliberations, the quiet weighing of choices, and the tension between love and effective guidance. Their professional lives intertwined with family responsibilities in ways that constantly tested endurance. Rob's directing and writing required focus, time, and energy, and while these achievements brought acclaim, they also meant absences that left gaps Michelle had to fill, managing both household and children's immediate needs. Michelle herself balanced activism, professional photography, and later film production, demonstrating a capacity to manage multiple demanding roles simultaneously. These pressures, though navigated with remarkable skill, added subtle strain, the accumulation of which would later influence decisions, interactions, and the emotional climate of the household. Nick's behavioral changes over time became an invisible current running through the family. Early signs, withdrawal, late nights, requests for money, were met with a mixture of hope, worry, and cautious tolerance. Rob's protective instincts prompted compliance, yet each concession subtly shifted the balance of authority and trust within the household. Michelle, observing and concerned, advocated for accountability, seeking ways to instill responsibility while maintaining love and support. This interplay between indulgence and discipline, protection and preparation, created a nuanced landscape of tension, reflection, and decision-making. Throughout these years, the contrast between public image and private reality became increasingly stark. To the world, Rob and Michelle's marriage was a model of enduring love, a symbol of stability amid Hollywood chaos. Behind closed doors, however, their experiences were textured with struggle, negotiation, and the constant management of expectations, emotions, and consequences. Their love remained deep and sustaining, yet it was tested daily by circumstance, choices, and the inherent unpredictability of human behavior. In these formative years before the crises that would later define their story, the Reiner household was a study in resilience, compromise, and the delicate art of balancing ambition with devotion, creativity with family, and the ideals of love with the realities of human imperfection. The foundation of their marriage, laid in admiration, mutual respect, and shared purpose, would endure many trials, yet the seeds of challenge and heartache were quietly present, shaping the trajectory of the family in ways that would become tragically evident in later years. As the years unfolded, the household that once felt secure and full of warmth began to show subtle cracks, imperceptible to anyone outside the walls. Nick, their son, who had once been the light of Rob and Michelle's lives, started to drift in ways that were difficult to interpret. Small changes became alarming patterns. Late nights that stretched into the early hours, evasive glances that avoided parental eyes, and small acts that hinted at rebellion or secrecy. At first, Rob told himself that it was typical adolescent behavior, temporary shifts in mood that would pass with patience and guidance. Michelle, however, recognized a deeper unease, a tension that suggested there was more at play than the expected trials of growing up. She noticed the requests for money that began casually gradually becoming more insistent, growing in both frequency and significance. Rob, driven by instinctual love and a desire to protect, often acquiesced, hoping to shield Nick from consequences while keeping him close. Yet, each act of protection subtly eroded the balance of authority, creating a tension between indulgence and accountability that neither parent had anticipated. The home, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and routine, began to carry a different weight. Each room seemed imbued with expectation and caution, corridors echoing with a tension that was silent but palpable. Arguments, once rare and fiery, became whispers and negotiations in the dead of night, where every word was measured, every gesture deliberate, and every action carried consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Rob reflected on how his demanding career in Hollywood, the long hours of directing, writing, and producing, while fulfilling professionally, often removed him from critical domestic moments. Michelle, equally dedicated to her work and her activism, carried the dual burden of managing professional obligations while maintaining the fragile cohesion of the family. The interplay of careers, public life, and family responsibilities created a constant undercurrent of stress, the effects of which rippled through every interaction and decision. Rob's recollections captured nights when Nick's frustration escalated into anger, sometimes manifesting physically. The son he once knew seemed to vanish behind a familiar face that no longer reflected the child he had raised. Doors slammed with the force of emotion, voices cracked, and the house itself seemed to tremble under the strain of conflicting needs. Michelle's insistence on boundaries collided with Rob's protective instincts, and the tension between these approaches created an ongoing silent battle within the home. Even minor incidents carried the weight of moral and emotional consequence, turning simple requests or disagreements into critical moments of decision and reflection. The accumulation of these moments, small betrayals, subtle manipulations, and the exhaustion of constant vigilance, gradually transformed their family life. Rob described the nights spent deliberating what course to take, when to intervene, and how much to allow, always with the hope of preserving the family and protecting Nick from harm, yet aware that overprotection might reinforce destructive patterns. Every choice felt loaded with potential consequences, each compromise a delicate navigation between love and enabling. Even the quietest interactions became part of a larger narrative, a series of decisions that determined the emotional and moral structure of the household. Rob also reflected on the impact of public perception. To the outside world, their lives appeared glamorous, ordered, and enviable. The family vacations, school events, and public appearances painted a picture of harmony. Yet beneath the surface, every decision was fraught with internal conflict. The contrast between image and reality weighed heavily on both parents, creating a persistent tension between the roles demanded by the world and the realities faced within their own home. As Nick's demands escalated and his behavior grew increasingly erratic, the emotional labor of parenting reached a breaking point. Nights were punctuated with uncertainty and fear, each instance of rebellion or misbehavior threatening to destabilize the delicate balance that Rob and Michelle had worked to maintain. Arguments that might have been resolved quickly in calmer times became prolonged cycles of whispering, reasoning, and careful observation. Rob realized that his love, no matter how intense, was insufficient alone to correct or guide his son. Every act of protection had unintended consequences, each decision a balancing act between immediate safety and long-term responsibility. Michelle's presence was both stabilizing and demanding. Her insistence on structure and accountability created friction, yet also preserved the integrity of the household. Rob admired her strength and clarity, even as it sometimes highlighted the limitations of his own approach. The tension between their philosophies of parenting, protection versus discipline, reflected broader questions about love, responsibility, and the ethical boundaries of care. Their home became a microcosm of these tensions, a space where affection and authority, indulgence and enforcement, coexisted in uneasy proximity. Small victories occasionally offered relief. A moment of understanding from Nick, a concession that reflected progress, a fleeting evening of calm. But setbacks followed quickly, eroding confidence, deepening worry, and reinforcing the sense that the family was on a precarious edge. Rob described the sense of helplessness that accompanied these moments, the internal struggle between the desire to shield and the necessity of guidance, the painful awareness that every choice could carry unforeseen consequences. In these quiet but significant struggles, Rob's narrative revealed the profound vulnerability of even seemingly perfect households. The accumulation of minor conflicts, missed signals, and subtle missteps formed a slow-moving current that would eventually shape the family's trajectory in ways that were both predictable and tragically unforeseen. Each whispered negotiation, each act of indulgence, each moment of restraint contributed to a complex, emotionally charged environment in which love, fear, and hope were in constant tension. Rob's confession captured the reality that private struggles often remain hidden, that families admired by the world can suffer deeply in silence, and that the interplay of protection, love, and human limitation carries consequences that are rarely visible outside the home. It was within this landscape of escalating tension and emotional labor that the seeds of later tragedy were sown, creating a story that, while intensely personal, resonates as a reflection on the challenges of love, responsibility, and the human condition. The consequences of the family's struggles began to reveal themselves slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, like shadows creeping across familiar walls. Rob and Michelle's efforts to protect and guide Nick had unintentionally created a tension that extended beyond the immediate moments of conflict. Every concession, every silent compromise had left subtle marks on the household dynamic, marks that only became visible over time. The quiet moments between arguments were heavy with unspoken disappointment, fear, and sorrow. Rob reflected on how love, when exercised without boundaries or clarity, can sometimes contribute to the very struggles it seeks to prevent. The balance they had so carefully maintained began to tilt, and with each misstep, the cracks widened. Nick's behavior, initially interpreted as adolescent rebellion, evolved into a series of crises that tested the family's cohesion. Late nights turned into prolonged absences, requests for money escalated, and the subtle defiance became more pronounced. Rob, in his desire to shield his son from both harm and public scrutiny, often prioritized immediate safety over long-term consequences. Michelle, observing the patterns, urged for accountability, yet even her insistence could not fully offset the weight of Rob's protective instincts. The children, both dependent and resistant, became entangled in the complexities of parental love and fear, each interaction layering additional tension onto an already fragile foundation. The emotional toll on Rob and Michelle was immense. Nights were spent in silence following whispered arguments, each parent grappling with the weight of decisions they could neither reverse nor fully control. The quiet after conflict often felt louder than the shouting itself, a reminder of unresolved tensions and the impossibility of perfect resolution. Rob recalled moments when he observed Nick's anger manifest physically, the son he had known transformed into someone unrecognizable. Fear and love coexisted uneasily in the home, each guiding choices that carried unforeseen consequences. Rob understood that the love he had poured into protecting his son had sometimes blinded him to the necessity of intervention, and that silence, chosen out of devotion, had inadvertently allowed certain patterns to continue unchecked. The strain extended beyond immediate family interactions. Rob and Michelle's marriage, though founded on deep love and mutual respect, began to bear the weight of exhaustion and unspoken resentment. Every act of indulgence, every compromise, subtly eroded the intimacy and trust that had once defined their partnership. Where laughter had once filled the house, there was now a cautious quiet, an awareness that every word, every decision, had the potential to inflame tensions or widen divides. They no longer argued over public appearances or fame. The source of conflict was now the very children they loved most, a paradox that brought both pain and helplessness. Each child's response to the household dynamics reflected different aspects of consequence. Jake, comfortable yet occasionally resistant, experienced the subtle effects of overindulgence, while Romy, outspoken and ambitious, developed a pattern of financial dependence that tested both parents' patience and judgment. Nick's struggles, however, were the most profound, the cumulative effects of earlier choices and indulgences manifesting in ways that neither parent could have predicted. The emotional and psychological impact on Rob and Michelle was profound, a mixture of guilt, fear, and sorrow that accompanied each interaction, each plea for understanding or support. Rob described the quiet despair of realizing that protective love, when not balanced with accountability, can become a source of vulnerability rather than security. Nights spent deliberating whether to call authorities, whether to enforce stricter boundaries, or whether to intervene in the smallest incidents, weighed heavily on both parents. Each decision carried moral, emotional, and practical implications, leaving them in a constant state of reflection and anticipation. The home, once a refuge, had transformed into a landscape of negotiation and careful observation, every gesture, word, and action imbued with significance. The broader social and psychological consequences became evident as the family dynamic unfolded. The strain affected not only the parents' relationship with Nick, but also their capacity to maintain a cohesive partnership. Rob's efforts to shield and protect sometimes conflicted with Michelle's insistence on responsibility and structure, creating a persistent tension that subtly undermined their unity. Even small successes, a moment of compliance, a shared understanding, were fragile and often followed by setbacks, reinforcing the cycle of worry, intervention, and reassessment. The quiet suffering, invisible to the outside world, was an ongoing testament to the complexity of love, responsibility, and human fallibility. Rob's reflections revealed a paradox of parental devotion. That love, even at its deepest and most unconditional, can carry unintended consequences. By striving to protect, they occasionally allowed harmful patterns to persist. By attempting to shield, they sometimes inadvertently prolonged struggle. The emotional consequences were cumulative, a slow accumulation of tension, fear, and sorrow that marked every interaction and decision. Michelle's guidance and insistence on accountability often collided with Rob's instinctive protection, creating both friction and resilience, a dynamic that was simultaneously stabilizing and testing. These pressures ultimately shaped the environment in which the family lived, influencing choices, behaviors, and relationships. Rob acknowledged the subtle erosion of trust and connection, the quiet despair that can accompany prolonged uncertainty, and the necessity of balancing compassion with discipline. The emotional landscape of their household became increasingly complex, a web of love, fear, hope, and exhaustion. Moments of joy and relief were interwoven with tension and worry, the two coexisting in ways that were both ordinary and extraordinary, mundane and deeply consequential. In reflecting on these experiences, Rob recognized that the family's struggles were not the result of a single catastrophic event, but the accumulation of countless small moments, concessions made in love, choices made in fear, and the quiet erosion of authority and structure over time. Each act, each decision, contributed to a narrative that was both personal and universally human, a story of devotion tested, love stretched, and the profound consequences of navigating the complexities of parenthood in the shadow of fame. In these moments, the impact of silent suffering, unspoken compromise, and the weight of protective instincts became painfully clear, illustrating the fragile balance that governs even the most devoted families. The consequences, while invisible to the public eye, were profound and lasting, shaping the emotional and psychological contours of every family member and setting the stage for the events that would later define the family's story in ways that were tragic, unavoidable, and deeply affecting. Behind the walls of the Reiner home, Life unfolded in ways the public could never see. While cameras captured premieres, red carpets, and Hollywood accolades, inside, Rob and Michelle navigated a daily rhythm filled with quiet tension, whispered negotiations, and moments of small, private heroism. Each parent bore the weight of responsibility in ways that went unnoticed, often sacrificing personal comfort to shield their children from harm or disappointment. Rob's protective instincts manifested not only in big gestures, but in countless subtle actions, answering late-night calls, navigating financial requests with care, and trying to anticipate the consequences of decisions before they rippled outward. Michelle, equally vigilant, maintained a structure within the home that kept routines intact, deadlines met, and emotional support available even in moments of crisis. Their work, though vital, never outweighed the immediate needs of their family. Yet balancing professional ambitions with domestic responsibilities created pressures that were invisible to anyone outside their home. Rob recalled nights when Nick's behavior escalated into frightening confrontations. A single knock on the bedroom door could carry the weight of hours of unresolved tension. Rob would listen to footsteps pacing, doors slamming, and voices raised just enough to communicate frustration without drawing external attention. In those moments, Rob made careful calculations, weighing when to intervene and when to allow space, aware that a single misstep could fracture trust or escalate conflict. Michelle's presence in these situations was both stabilizing and challenging. Her insistence on accountability sometimes clashed with Rob's instinct to shield, yet her firmness often prevented situations from spiraling further. The quiet interplay between their philosophies created a home environment that was protective, yet fraught with tension, where each small decision carried long-term consequences for both their children and their relationship. Even beyond moments of confrontation, the Reiners faced ongoing challenges that were subtle but profound. Nick's requests for money, initially small and occasional, evolved into frequent demands that carried the weight of expectation and the subtle threat of withdrawal or conflict. Rob often complied, hoping to maintain closeness, yet each concession chipped away at the boundaries they had established. Michelle observed the pattern, sometimes urging restraint, sometimes expressing concern in quiet tones that communicated urgency without confrontation. The tension between indulgence and discipline became a constant undercurrent in family life, shaping interactions, influencing behavior, and creating a silent narrative of struggle that no outside observer could perceive. The quieter moments, however, were not without significance. Rob reflected on the small victories, the instances when a child showed understanding or a moment of compromise occurred. These glimpses of progress, though fleeting, were often the only relief from the relentless weight of worry and responsibility. Each meal shared without argument, each conversation in which a child spoke honestly became a moment of reassurance, a fragile thread holding the family together. Yet setbacks always followed, reinforcing the sense that the household was on a precarious edge. Even the simplest gestures, a glance, a sigh, a whispered request, carried emotional weight and consequences, shaping relationships in ways that were invisible but deeply felt. The quiet struggles extended beyond Nick. Jake, the eldest, experienced the subtle consequences of overprotection, navigating life with comfort and opportunity, yet sometimes lacking the motivation to take responsibility independently. Romy, outspoken and ambitious, developed patterns of reliance and expectation that challenged both parents' ability to maintain boundaries. Rob recognized the emotional complexity of each child's development, understanding that his choices, motivated by love, sometimes perpetuated behaviors he had hoped to guide or correct. The interplay of individual temperament, parental decision-making, and accumulated tension created a layered dynamic, one in which every action had ripple effects that were invisible to the outside world. Rob often recounted moments that seemed ordinary to an outsider, yet carried immense emotional significance. Late-night conversations, shared looks of understanding between parents, and small acts of compromise were the foundation of daily life, even when overshadowed by the challenges they faced. The house itself became a witness to countless unspoken negotiations, the walls absorbing the tension, the fear, and the hope that permeated every room. These were the moments that defined their family life more than any public appearance. Yet they remained largely invisible to friends, colleagues, and the broader audience who admired them from afar. The Reiner story also included moments of quiet heroism, where the effort to protect, nurture, and maintain family cohesion required emotional strength beyond measure. Rob described the nights spent comforting Nick despite fear and uncertainty, the careful navigation of confrontations to prevent escalation, and the daily attention to both children's needs and emotional states. Michelle's contributions were equally vital, her discipline, structure, and clarity providing a framework within which the family could survive, even thrive, amid adversity. Their combined efforts created an environment that was both nurturing and constrained, protective yet challenging, a balance that required constant vigilance, empathy, and endurance. Even in the smallest, most intimate moments, the weight of these struggles was apparent. A simple request for understanding or assistance became an opportunity to reinforce values, boundaries, and expectations. Each conversation carried moral and emotional implications, each decision a delicate negotiation between compassion and responsibility. Rob reflected on the paradox of love. The deeper the devotion, the greater the potential for unintended consequences. By striving to protect, he sometimes enabled behavior that challenged the household. By choosing silence in moments of conflict, he sometimes prolonged suffering. Each choice, however well-intentioned, contributed to the ongoing tension and quietly shaped the trajectory of the family's life. Through these stories, Rob's confession revealed the profound realities of private family life, hidden behind the facade of public perfection. The struggles, sacrifices, and quiet endurance of Rob and Michelle demonstrated the invisible labor of love, the tension between protection and accountability, and the nuanced challenges of parenting in a complex, high-pressure environment. These moments, largely unseen and unrecognized, were the threads that wove the intricate, emotional tapestry of their lives, a tapestry defined by devotion, endurance, and the quiet, often invisible, toll of maintaining love under relentless pressure. The Reiners' private experiences became a mirror for universal truths about family, love, and the human capacity to endure, highlighting the subtle, powerful narratives that exist behind even the most seemingly perfect lives. In the quiet reflection of what had passed, Rob Reiner often considered the paradoxes of love and life. The years spent raising his family, navigating the complexities of fame, and enduring private struggles had shaped him in ways no public accolade could capture. He understood, with a clarity born from hardship, that love carried weight far beyond the warmth of smiles or the comfort of closeness. It demanded endurance, sacrifice, and sometimes the painful acceptance that affection alone could not solve every problem. The lessons of these years were written not in headlines or awards, but in the subtle fabric of daily life, in moments of silence, in decisions made out of devotion, and the quiet resilience required to hold a family together against invisible pressures. Rob reflected on Michelle's profound influence in shaping not only their household, but his understanding of purpose and responsibility. Her strength, discipline, and insight had been the counterbalance to his exuberance and generosity. She had instilled structure where spontaneity could have faltered, demanded accountability when indulgence tempted, and maintained an unspoken moral compass that guided every decision. In doing so, she created a legacy of intentionality and integrity, showing that the measure of love is not only in acts of warmth, but also in the courage to enforce boundaries when necessary. Rob often marveled at her capacity to balance her career, activism, and parenting with grace, a testament to the resilience and commitment that defined her influence on their family. The children, shaped by the intersection of indulgence and discipline, bore the imprint of these dynamics. Nick, Jake, and Romy each carried forward lessons, challenges, and patterns forged in the crucible of their upbringing. Rob recognized that his protective instincts, while motivated by love, had sometimes complicated their development, yet he also understood the importance of guiding with compassion and patience. The quiet lessons embedded in daily routines, in repeated acts of care and correction, contributed to the unfolding of each child's character. The weight of these responsibilities left Rob with an acute awareness of the long-term consequences of parental choices, the subtle ripple effects that only time could reveal. Rob also pondered the interplay of public perception and private reality. The world had admired the Reiners as a model couple, yet the hidden complexities of their family life were invisible to even the closest observers. He reflected on the tension between maintaining appearances and attending to the emotional realities of home life, realizing that legacy was not measured in public approval but in the strength and integrity of intimate bonds. The lessons of discretion, resilience, and perseverance became part of the quiet inheritance he hoped to leave his children, an understanding that life is complicated, love is demanding, and the true measure of commitment is endurance through difficulty. In these reflections, Rob recognized that the tragedy and joy of his life were intertwined. The public triumphs of his career, the films he directed, the stories he told, the accolades he earned, were inseparable from the private struggles that had defined his household. The lessons learned from navigating crises, from managing conflict, and from sustaining love in the face of exhaustion contributed to a perspective that valued authenticity over image, depth over appearance, and human connection over superficial recognition. His life became a study in balance between professional ambition and domestic responsibility, between indulgence and accountability, and between the immediacy of action and the long-term effects of decisions. The concept of legacy weighed heavily on Rob's mind. He understood that the stories told by others, through media, public appearances, and accolades, would capture only fragments of the truth. The real legacy, he realized, resided in the lessons imparted to his children, the enduring principles instilled through daily acts of care, discipline, and reflection. He considered how love, even when imperfectly applied, can guide, sustain, and shape future generations, and how each small decision, repeated over time, contributes to the invisible architecture of character and values. Rob also acknowledged the emotional cost of endurance. Years of managing crises, navigating conflicts, and protecting loved ones left scars invisible to all but himself. He understood that resilience required both action and reflection, that the quiet sacrifices of daily life were as significant as the grand gestures celebrated publicly. Each moment of patience, each deliberate intervention, each decision to choose love over confrontation carried the weight of long-term consequence and shaped the moral and emotional landscape of the family. Through these reflections, Rob recognized the enduring power of Michelle's influence, the lessons embedded in their shared experience, and the subtle, often invisible ways in which love and commitment shape lives. He understood that the truest measure of their partnership was not in fame or fortune, but in the daily persistence of care, the negotiation of differences, and the cultivation of integrity amidst imperfection. In this quiet reckoning, the meaning of their life together emerged, a story of devotion, endurance, and the profound consequences of choosing love, even when it is difficult, even when it demands sacrifice, and even when the outcome is uncertain. Ultimately, Rob's reflections on these years underscored the complex interplay between human ambition, vulnerability, and responsibility. He recognized that family, like life itself, is defined by both triumph and struggle, by moments of connection and moments of fracture, and by the choices made in silence that ripple outward in unforeseen ways. The legacy of their life together, he realized, lay in the authenticity of experience, the courage to face challenges, and the enduring commitment to care deeply, act intentionally, and love fully, even in the face of adversity. In the end, the story of Rob and Michelle Reiner became not only a record of fame and achievement, but a meditation on the human capacity for endurance, love, and the quiet shaping of lives that persists long after the public gaze has moved on. The final chapter of Rob and Michelle Reiner's life unfolded in a way that no one could have anticipated. For decades, their love had been both an anchor and a shield, protecting them and their children from the unpredictable forces of life while quietly shaping their world. Yet, despite their devotion and persistence, the culmination of years of subtle tension, unspoken fears, and choices made in silence reached a breaking point that was both sudden and inevitable. The home that had once been a sanctuary, a place of laughter, warmth, and creative energy, became the stage for the most profound and tragic consequences. The quiet endurance that had defined their marriage, the careful balance of indulgence and discipline, protection and accountability, could not withstand the cumulative pressures that had been building for years. Every whispered conversation, every small compromise, every act of love had contributed to the unfolding narrative, a story that now reached its devastating conclusion. Rob reflected on the fragility of perception, the contrast between public image and private reality. To the world, they had been a model couple, a symbol of enduring love, stability, and purpose. Behind the public facade, however, the realities of parenthood, personal struggle, and unrelenting pressure told a different story. Nick's challenges, compounded by parental choices made in love, had slowly transformed the dynamics of the household. Jake and Romy, too, were influenced by patterns of dependence, negotiation, and expectation that neither parent could fully control. Rob recognized that these outcomes were not the result of singular moments of failure, but of thousands of small decisions, acts of patience, and instances of compromise that collectively shaped the family's trajectory. The quiet erosion of balance and trust had set the stage for heartbreak that no preparation could prevent. The day came when tragedy could no longer be avoided. Despite the years of effort, the guidance provided, and the love given freely, the Reiners' carefully maintained equilibrium collapsed. Their children, shaped by the family's dynamics and by the limitations of intervention, reached a point where the consequences of their actions could no longer be mitigated. Rob and Michelle's devotion, which had once seemed limitless, was tested in ways that revealed the limits of human endurance. The silent compromises that had once been protective now contributed to the unraveling of the life they had so painstakingly built. The home became a crucible in which love, fear, and responsibility collided, producing outcomes that no one could have predicted. Rob often pondered the nature of love and protection in the days before this final moment. He understood that love, even at its deepest, cannot always control outcomes, that protection can sometimes become complicity, and that silence, chosen out of devotion, can inadvertently allow harm to persist. Each decision, each act of patience or indulgence, carried consequences that were both immediate and cumulative. He recognized that the tragedy that struck was not sudden, but the result of a complex web of relationships, choices, and unspoken struggles that had developed over years. In that quiet reckoning, Rob understood the paradox of devotion, that the very love intended to safeguard his family could, under certain circumstances, contribute to the very events he had sought to prevent. The moments leading up to the final tragedy were filled with the same quiet tension that had defined much of their family life. Arguments, compromises, whispered disagreements, and unspoken fears had woven a narrative of endurance and strain. Rob's recollections of these moments reveal a family grappling with the limits of human capability, the tension between love and discipline, and the impact of cumulative stress on decision-making. The Reiners' experience became a powerful meditation on the vulnerability inherent in parenthood, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the consequences of choices made in the name of protection and affection. Even in the face of impending loss, Rob and Michelle remained devoted, navigating the complexities of family life with care, empathy, and unwavering attention. Their actions, though imperfect, reflected a commitment to love that extended beyond themselves. They balanced professional responsibilities, public scrutiny, and domestic challenges, demonstrating the emotional labor and endurance required to maintain a household under extraordinary pressures. The subtle acts of care, the whispered reassurances, the small compromises, all formed an invisible architecture of family life that was both resilient and precarious. The final moments, though tragic, were the culmination of a lifetime of devotion. Rob's reflections underscore the paradox of human experience, that love can be both sustaining and vulnerable, that endurance has limits, and that the consequences of choices, even those made with the best intentions, are often beyond prediction. The Reiner story became a testament to the complexity of family life, the fragility of perceived perfection, and the profound impact of private struggles that are rarely visible to the world. It revealed the depth of commitment required to sustain love and the emotional toll exacted when those efforts collide with unpredictable human behavior. In the end, Rob and Michelle Reiner's story is both a cautionary tale and a meditation on the nature of human devotion. It illustrates the profound responsibilities of parenthood, the limits of protection, and the fragile balance between love and accountability. Their lives, filled with both extraordinary achievement and heartbreaking challenges, leave a legacy that is both inspiring and sobering. The public may remember their fame, their contributions to film and activism, but the true testament lies in the quiet endurance, the acts of care and courage, and the complex, often painful, reality of sustaining a family amidst adversity. Their story asks questions that linger beyond the final moments. How far would one go to protect the people they love? When does devotion become enabling? When does silence become complicity? And ultimately, can love alone ever prevent tragedy when faced with the limits of human behavior? These questions, unanswered and haunting, resonate far beyond the Reiner's home, leaving a lasting impression on anyone who contemplates the delicate, intricate, and deeply human story of Rob and Michelle Reiner.